Hello, Kootenai County. We're here today with your current county assessor, Bela Kovacs. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me to join you.
You're welcome. We're so happy to have you. We're going to ask him about 5 questions, and then he's going to give you his closing statement, and we're going to learn a lot from him tonight. So we'll start with your first question. Why are you running for office?
Well, thank you. Well, again, I want to thank you everybody for inviting me here. It's really a good opportunity to get the message out. Yes, so I've been in office for 6 years. And in the past 6 years, I've been working on reform and modernizing the operations. When I became the assessor in 2020, it was, as we all might remember, the height of COVID. There were a lot of things going on, shutdowns. The office was closed. The property rolls at that time were already a done deal. So I had really no involvement whatsoever in those property rolls. So I interviewed staff, I met staff. They say that an assessor, or really an appraiser, coming into the operations, it takes a full 5 years to really get the knowledge under their belt in terms of what they need to know and what they need to do. That's because there's a 5-year plan, and you have to rotate. You can't see all parcels every year. I tend to disagree with that a little bit. I don't think you need to see everything to really learn the operations. But so anyway, back to your question, why am I running for office? To finish the job. We began the reform. There were lots of things that were unstable, primarily the computer system. There's 3 pillars in the assessor's office: people, systems, and data. And they are all interdependent, they are all interlinked. And if you change one, you affect the other. Ultimately, our product is data. It's the property rolls, it's the assessments, it's the values. We take in data, we collect data, we analyze data, we crunch through the numbers, and we produce data. But it depends upon people, and it depends upon systems and processes. Systems, when I use the word systems, I'm talking about business excuse me, business flows, workflows, computer processes, virtually anything that the boundaries with which we have to do our jobs in. So it's the laws, it's the policy, it's the procedures. So it involved looking at all of those things and updating them and modernizing those. We didn't have written procedures. A lot of the knowledge was in the heads of the people, and the people were approaching retirement. We had a lot of people that had been working there for many years, baby boomers, excuse me. And as the Bureau of Labor Statistics has revealed, the baby boomers, the retirement of the baby boomers peaked in 2022. So we were facing a lot of instability and change. Of course, COVID itself represented change, so there was a lot of turmoil. I began working on reforming the systems primarily, and the work is not done. The work needs to be completed. It's kind of difficult to finish, or to maybe not be in the office any longer when the reform is part of the way done. What you end up with is an unfinished result. And so I'm asking for the voter support so I can be reelected, so I can finish the job of reform.
Wonderful. So explain the job of assessor and how it relates to the tax bills that we all get every year.
Okay, interesting topic. A lot of people think that the assessor is the tax man. Interesting fact. I did some research, and many years ago, I can't tell you how many years ago, but I would say it's probably decades ago, and I mean like in the 60s or perhaps even before then, the assessor used to be the tax man. Used to be the tax collector, but Idaho law changed, and the assessor is not the tax man or the tax assessor. There is a difference. The word assessor is both a noun and a verb, and as far as my role, what the assessor does is we place the value. We look at the market conditions. We're spectators, so to speak, of what transpires in the market. It's all based upon the principles of economics, laws of supplies and demand, the principle of substitutability, diminishing returns. I mean, all the economic principles that you can imagine come into play when it comes to assessing and appraising value. So our job is to have the values be at market value. If you read the law says market value, which is essentially 100%. It's what the market is. There are professional standards that allow tolerance because it is an opinion of value after all, and it's not a very precise science. We want to make it as precise as we possibly can be. We want to be accurate, obviously. But there's a tolerance that allows us to be, it's called the IAAO standard,
Okay.
the International Association of Assessing Officers. It's a standard that allows us to be plus or minus 10% of a market value. And that is incorporated, that standard, although it's not law itself, it is incorporated into the law of Idaho through the Idaho Administrative Procedure Act, IDAPA. And so we set the value. Now the value is nothing more than the means of allocation. It's the distribution, the method of distributing the share of property tax.
Okay.
We all live in a community and a society, and we like it very much when our government services work for us.
Yeah.
When we flush the toilet, we expect it to go where it needs to go. When we have a problem and we need law enforcement, we certainly hope and would like to expect law enforcement respond timely. Or whether that's fire rescue or what have you. Any of the government services that we need, we'd like to have our roads paved. And so on and on and on we can go. And so that needs revenue. These people don't work for free, and they do very hard work, and they need to be rewarded for their work. And so that ultimately results in budgets. Budgets are adopted by the city councils, the school boards, the governing bodies, the county commissioners adopt the budget for the county. And so every one of these local government jurisdictions, they're called taxing districts, every single one of them adopt a budget. And so the way we get to your question, the answer to your question of the job of the assessor and how it relates to taxes, is it comes down to a levy rate. And the levy rate is nothing more than a fraction. It's, again, a means of distributing the burden of tax. So you have the budgets, and I'm going to say the aggregate budget, so wherever your house is situated, you probably live inside of a city boundary if you're in the urban area, or you might live in a rural, in the county area, but you're definitely within various taxing districts, so you might be within a school district, a fire district. There are even some mosquito districts down south. But there are various different districts, and wherever your property resides, you are subject to a property tax to pay for the government services that are allocated to that area where you live. And so it's that budget for all those governments is the top number of the fraction, the numerator, right? And then the bottom number is the aggregate assessed value, the value of all the properties that are assessed together that are also in that jurisdiction for all those. And so it's a fraction, and so you divide the fraction out. Now what do we know about a fraction? Well, when the bottom number, the denominator, when that number increases, the overall result of the fraction goes down. That means the levy rates go down. So what is the bottom number? It's the aggregate assessed value. What controls that? Market appreciation, right? Supply and demand, buyers coming willing to spend and pay the price for the property, and the seller willing to sell at that value. So that's the market value. The top number is the budget. I'm sorry, I got a little bit ahead of myself. The bottom number, the fraction, that number goes up by the supply and demand, but there's another factor that increases that bottom number, and it's growth. Okay. So when there are new subdivisions and new plats and new developments, what that's doing is that's actually increasing the denominator again. It's just adding more properties that the budget will be distributed over, so that the shares get lower, if that makes sense. And so whenever the bottom number increases, the levy rate goes down.
Okay.
The other value on top, the numerator, the budgets, that's directly related to the increases. So when that top number goes up, when it increases, your taxes will go up. And that just means that it's the various governing bodies, they just need more of your money. And so a lot of people don't necessarily understand that. Yes, there can be a factor that does drive your property taxes up a little bit if your value goes up. For example, if this is your house and this is commercial properties, and your value is going like this, the market says all values need to go up uniformly among the classes of those subject properties, right? But so if yours is going like this and all commercials are going like this at the same time, that's fair, that's good, right? That's the way it should work. But if over the course of 20 years, say, commercial staying here and yours is going up, but then commercial goes up a little bit, but then residential goes more up, what's happening, we end up paying their tax. If these should be going up, but they're not going up. And so that's the problem. And so the job of the assessor is extremely important. Our job is to make sure that all processes are done uniformly in the correct manner. It is a job of details. My background, I have a background of about 26 years, 27 years in government administration.
Okay.
Prior to that, I worked for about 20 years in private sector. I have 20 years of private sector experience at Fortune 100 companies. And one of those was a Fortune 500 company for a spell. But you know, I learned the importance of administration and managing by exception reports and using those tools to administer the processes. And the details do matter. So I think I got a little off topic here. How the job of the assessor relates to the tax bills. Essentially, we make sure it's fair and equitable, and that's very, very important to everybody.
Wonderful. Well, we're learning.
Yeah.
So thank you for
Yeah,
that.
thank you.
And where do you see the assessor's office needs to improve, and what are your recommendations? What would
Yeah,
be
thank you. That's a big question. As I mentioned before, there's three pillars: the people, the systems, and the data. And you know, some of those we can control. We can control the data through our process and our methodologies. We can control the data in terms of how we get the data. We might even be able to exert some influence in terms of how that data is prepared and presented to us, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a minute. But that's the data. The systems, I touched upon that before a moment ago, and that is if the computer systems are problematic, if those are the process whereby we accomplish our jobs, anything that we can do to streamline that process and make it better, make it more accurate, is going to substantially enhance the outcome. And then of course people, we want people that have the aptitude and the training and the skill sets to do the job, and we need to support those people because there are changes that occur. Every year there's legislative changes, every year there's new lessons to be learned from perhaps case law or what have you. And so we want to make sure that our staff is trained and educated, not just on those facts, but also in the discipline of the mathematics and the skill sets that are necessary to learn construction quality and grade, because after all, the job does entail inspection and being able to know and identify whether the project is quality or not. There's a difference between quality that's reflected in value. So I can dial in those a little bit more to give you a more detailed answer, but I think the challenge was when I came into the assessor's office in 2020, within about 6 months after I was there, the chief deputy tendered his resignation for retirement. He informed me that one of the reasons he was leaving was because of the amount of instability that we were facing. And that's not unique to Kootenai County. I mean, I'm sure perhaps, you know, the timing and COVID, and there's a lot of change that was going on at that time. Perhaps that had a factor into it. But we're not alone. The world of assessment is not necessarily an attractive discipline. I mean, let's face it, when I think of assessment, I think of stodgy old men drinking cigars or drinking whiskey or perhaps smoking cigars, and nothing really changes. It's the same thing. It's math. How often does math change? It's, you know, it's just math, right? And it's data analysis. So there's nothing particularly interesting about it because it's kind of a dry subject. And so I believe that's part of the challenge. The other challenge is there's a high hurdle rate to get people in to do the work. In government, nobody can really assess and appraise the value unless they're certified. That's part of state law. And in order to become certified, it takes a year. It requires 2,080 hours of work experience, and that's direct supervised work experience. You have to be supervised by a certified tax appraiser in doing that work. So when you hire someone that's not trained, that's kind of a burden.
You have a whole year.
You have a whole year. You have a whole year to train, but that sort of ties up the time of the experienced appraiser who's got to supervise the work. And so that's kind of a burden, right? And then the other factor is they have to take 2 courses And one of them is selected, one of them is determined. It's the beginning course essentially of appraisal.
Okay.
You have to complete the coursework, you have to take the exam, you have to pass the exam, and so once you've done all that, then you could become a certified property tax appraiser, and then you're able to go out there and do the work unsupervised. So there's a kind of a higher hurdle rate there to get that done. Improvement. So I don't think there's anything I can do to shorten that time frame. So we just got to make sure that the people we have are trained and they keep up on their training so that they're current on all those skill sets. The biggest problem we had was the computer system.
Yeah.
And when I came into the office, I did meet with each appraiser in the appraisal division. There's two divisions, the commercial and specialized, as well as the residential. And I learned that I met one-on-one. The appraisers did thank me. They thanked me because a few of them said, we've never done this before. We've never had a one-on-one meeting with the appraiser, with the assessor, excuse me. And so they were happy to do that. But they also revealed to me some concerns they had. Perhaps the most unanimous thing that they said was they need to fix the computer system. If I could do anything to help them fix the computer system. The problem with the computer, and when I interviewed, I also separately I interviewed with my predecessor, two predecessors prior to me was Mike McDowell. I sat down and met with him, and I asked him questions about the computer system. I met with the treasurer's office, and the topic of the computer system came up.
Yeah.
I met with IT, Information Technology Department, the people that were administrating. I met with both the individual that was there in place, who then quickly retired in August of 2020, and then I also met with his replacement, and they all talked about the computer system. And it was interesting because when they talked about it, I kind of got the feeling that in sort of a way that they explained themselves, they said, well, they didn't quite say it in these words, but they seemed reluctant to be fully open and honest about what the problem was with the computer system.
Okay.
I found out later, I believe, what the issue was. And no one actually came and told me what the issue was. I can only presume that this was the answer. Two reasons. With my background in purchasing and contracting, I did that for about 20 years at Spokane County. One of the things I did was I examined the contract. I looked at the contract for the vendor that provided the computer system. And very clearly the contract stipulates that the owner of the computer system at the county was the IT director. It actually lists him by name. It also outlines the parameters of what you can't do and what you have to do under the terms of the contract. Okay. And one of the most significant things that I noticed was you cannot customize the computer system. And that's what Kootenai County did, is they customized the computer system. There's some debate, there's some finger pointing, and I'm used to seeing that as a purchasing director for Spokane County for many years. When things go awry on a contract, everybody starts the blame game. There's all the finger pointing, right? Yeah. When I met with Mike McDowell, he told me that it was the software engineers at the software company. Mm-hmm. He said that the software team that was assigned to the treasurer did not talk to the software team that was assigned to the assessor. And because they didn't talk, it was a problem. Mm-hmm. When I met with the prior chief deputy treasurer, she told me that the problem was with the assessor's office, because the assessor's office didn't do proper testing, and they didn't pay close enough attention to the testing during the time frames when they needed to test it and so forth. The same story I heard from IT, and that's where that reluctance comes in, because nobody wants to be a rat in terms of telling on somebody else, and so they wanted to be truthful with me, I think, but they also didn't want to rat out somebody else. But in my background as a purchasing director, one of the cardinal sins well, there's two cardinal sins. You never customize the computer system without the involvement of the software company. Right. Because when you do that, you void your warranty. And the contract pretty much says that. The other thing you do is you never accept something for government when it's not acceptable. Because the minute you, in any contract for a project of this size and magnitude, you implement the computer systems, you have teams that put it, you test it, it's a very long, rigorous process. And at the end, you have a testing phase to make sure that the deliverables are what you bargained for. To make sure, and this is where it's very important to have a third-party engineer come in and monitor, because the people that work in government are not experts. We're not, nobody, the prior assessor, they're not expert engineers, right? So this is why it's very beneficial to contract with a third-party engineer who has experience and knows how to do these systems. It's not the same party as the vendor, because of course the vendor's going to tell you, hey, it works, it's great, right?
Right.
So you need someone to kind of test that, right? And so that wasn't done at Kootenai County. And when they went to go live, things didn't work properly.
Right.
And so there was a first failure in 2004. The database was lost entirely. They had to rebuild the database from scratch manually from the paper records. Then pretty much the same thing happened again 10 years later when they did a system upgrade in 2014. They had problems, it didn't work. And again, there's the finger pointing. Who's the cause, right? Well, there's documentation, I believe it's from around 2010, where they accepted the system as complete and delivered by the vendor. That's the other cardinal sin. You don't do that, because once you accept it as complete, you have to pay the bill, because you're basically saying to the vendor, you've done your job, you've given us the product, now we got to pay you. And then all of the initial crew that's there to help with the rollout, they go away, and it should be just routine, right? Well, that happened, and the system was accepted, but it really was not acceptable. And so fixing the computer system was a major issue, because things were customized. Let me back up a little bit. I was told that the reason the computer system didn't work was because there was a version that they all agreed upon, but when the time came to implement it, for whatever reason, it got rolled back and they didn't implement that version. So the county, some of the county blamed the software company. There was some internal finger pointing, as I understand it, they parted their ways, but because they had a contract, they had to have a maintenance agreement in place, and so they paid maintenance. But maintenance was negligible, because the vendor is not they don't have the bandwidth to support customizations that they weren't involved in, and they don't even know what was customized. It's very random for them. So, because of the customizations and because of the computer problems, there were a lot of business workflows that were created, that were manually created. If you can't get the computer to do what you need it to do, what it's designed to do, then the individuals, this is where a lot of the employees really stepped up. They found ways to manually fix the problem, manually to keep the ship afloat. And it came at a tremendous human cost, and they worked very hard to do it, and they were very heroic. But what happened is they became very bonded to their way of doing things, because it needed to be fixed. They saved the day. They were salvaging the operations and making it work, right? There's a difference between high-tech solutions and soft-tech solutions. Soft-techs are finding the manual workaround processes, and some of them there were aspects of the computer system that they just couldn't figure out how to work, that they never implemented the features. So there were these layers of problems. One of the other problem was, one of the manual solutions was the way the data is imported. Now, you have some experience and knowledge of real estate, right? There's lots of real estate transactions that occur every year. What is it, 10 to 15,000, depending on how good of a year it is, of transactions per year, right? And at each one of those sales has a lot of data points. You've got the acreage, you've got the lot size, you've got the dimensions of the property, you've got everything, different layers. So there's thousands upon thousands of data points for one parcel.
Right.
Now imagine all that data coming in, and you've got two individuals, and their job is to just manually type that in. We were not getting data feeds that were uploaded. I can't believe it, but a lot of this data was just being manually typed into the system, and when that happens, you end up creating human error, because there's fatigue. And so that was the first opportunity to do some fixes, is to how do we get the data, and that's also an opportunity to clean the data, because the way that the realtors sometimes process the data is different than the way we need the data in our system. The systems don't necessarily match up.
Right.
So lots of those processes. And then within the assessor's operations, you've got the land records and mapping division, which processes the ownership transfers. They do the subdivision plats, the market segmentations, the mergers, the splits, the lot line adjustments. They keep track of all of that, and then that goes on to the next stage, which is well, at the time it was called the appraisal technicians, and the appraisal technicians they do some data entry and implementation, but they do many other things. But at that stage, they do some processing, and then it goes to the appraisers, and the appraisers have to do their work. And so there's all these different stages, and the problem was, if you can imagine an hourglass, and there's a pinch point in an hourglass, and take that hourglass, that's a pipe, right? If the hourglass is a fitting between joining two other pipes, and the pipe is your workflow, but you got this hourglass point right here, pinch point, it really slows down the process.
Yeah.
And that's what we had with these manual workaround processes. Then you have the data that it gets to the point in the productivity, you think of it as a critical path. And the appraiser's job is to then go out and look at the property and review the property characteristics, and if they can, measure and gather all their information, and then they analyze the sales, and they analyze the data, and they look at the market adjustments, and look at what the market did. But the problem with these processes, because of the computer systems that were not working, is at different junctures in the process, the data was pulled outside of the computer system,
Oh, wow.
processed, and then dumped back into the computer system. And the problem that occurs when you do that is I don't know if you have any experience in computer systems, but you destroy your audit trail, right? It's no longer matching up in your audit trail. And that was done at multiple times and multiple junctures throughout the whole process to the completion. And so that was very problematic, and that could have been the source of a lot of the problems. And then finally, throughout the whole process, you get down to so we produce the property rolls in June, right? The main property rolls. But then that doesn't capture all the property, because there's ongoing continued construction. And so there's another set of property rolls that we have to produce at the end of the year to capture the balance, right? What was missed at that point in time. And so at the end of the year, one of the problems is that we had, based upon all these manual processes, based upon the workarounds and so forth, some of the data coming in that was not quite right, there's going to be errors stacked up at the end. Some of them are human errors, some of them are data errors, some of them are maybe process errors, right? But the way it used to work is it would get down to about mid-December when they're trying to put together the end of the year property rolls, and it was everything that two people could do to sift through about 40,000 lines of data and information to find, just two of them, just to find the errors, to then blindly fix those errors and see if that fixed the issue and try to rerun the property roll. Oh, that didn't work, they got to do it again. And so it was trial and error, crunch time literally from the last 2 weeks of the year, and sometimes it was a real nail biter to see if you're going to get it done in time, because you had to get it done by the end of the year.
Wow.
And so those were the opportunities to fix processes. And I'm happy to say that problem I just described was fixed. It was fixed in 2023. I received an email from the IT director saying, basically applauding my staff and my team. This has never happened before. It happened for the first time. And going forward, we also made some changes in terms of timing and how we plan some things. And so we've never looked back. So that was fixed. So that was a long answer to your question.
Well, we learned a lot, so
yeah.
I'm
and there's more that I could describe, but let's just leave it there because I don't want to bore you with the details. Well, let me just say one last thing. I have implemented Project Simpatico. In 2023, I learned that the State Tax Commission and all the other counties are going to move towards a new generation computer system. And because we did things so differently, we were called the island of Kootenai County. We were a state unto ourselves. We did things so differently that we didn't have any compatibility with the rest of the state or the State Tax Commission. And they use the same computer system. And so one of my goals has been to get Kootenai County onto the state standard. And so one of the projects that I've worked on, which when I found out that the state is moving towards a new computer system, we absolutely, if we want to maintain parity, we absolutely have to convert our processes to the way the state does it. Yeah. And so I asked the consultant, can we do a computer system reset? Can we basically undo all the customizations? And he said, well, yeah, we can do it at a cost, but we would have had to do that anyway to prepare ourselves to be ready for the ultimate conversion to a newer system.
Yeah.
And so we did that. That started in the early part of 2024. We got all the way to the end of 2024, and we were ready to implement. And I said, no, I want the treasurer's office to test it because I don't want to impact their operations.
Okay.
When they looked at it and they started testing, they discovered, oh, Kootenai County Assessor is going to be able to use the State Tax Commission's tools and systems for testing. By converting our operations to doing it more like the State Tax Commission, we're going to be able to have 400 to 500 audits, checklists, and reports that we've never been able to use before. That's going to help us clean our data every month, as a matter of routine, so that we don't have those problems to try to clean up at the end of the year. So when they found out we were doing it, they said, well, we want to do that too.
Oh.
And so they developed their own version of Simpatico, and it took another year to program that. I'm happy to say that we've implemented it on April 14th of this year. Things are going great. There's a little snags. There's always going to be little snags. You got to break things before you can fix them. But it's going well, and we're looking forward. We have to do it because we're losing our IT personnel this summer. The people who have the institutional knowledge that know how to handle the system, they're retiring and they're going away. And so we're not going to have the resources. We need to be able to rely on the resources of the State Tax Commission.
Yeah.
And that's all the more reason why the treasurer decided to get on the project as well. So, so yeah, we fixed those things. There's always opportunity for more. There's other computer systems that we need to fix. This is phase one, essentially, of a multi-phase modernization effort and systems update effort. And I believe I need probably another 6 to 7 years to complete it. So,
Wow.
yeah.
It's a long process.
It is.
So not on the questions, but it occurred to me, if you don't mind answering, how do you keep up with the legislative changes?
How do I keep up with the legislative
Yeah, how
changes?
do you know when,
Right.
are you keeping up with Boise, or they notify you?
So there are feeds that you can tap into. You can subscribe to feeds.
Okay.
There are other assessors that we engage. We have meetings and discussions. We are on, we exchange emails to keep others updated. There is an association called the Idaho Association of Counties. It's basically a state version of the national version of the Association of Counties. So there's NACO, which is the National Association of Counties, and then here in Idaho, we have an Idaho version of that, and that's called Idaho Association of Counties. And so they do a very good job of assisting the various counties and working with state legislatures and helping
To implement.
well, and to coordinate and to guide, and if there's a potential piece of legislation that's a problem or going to be a problem, then the assessors will get together and we will talk and we will interact with each other. We involve IAC because they have some resources and they can do some analysis and some investigations. And so we work with that. So yeah, it's an ongoing effort. If the issue is significant enough, we reach out to state representatives and have conversations, or we'll send emails. I happen to send emails to our representatives, all of our local representatives, about this computer system conversion that's coming up. Back when they started talking about that, they talked about how the state was going to, at that time the state had a $2 billion surplus and they were going to help fund the counties. That's changed a little bit, but I thought it was very important to inform our representatives, because ultimately if the state's going to fund this, then they have to work it through the state legislature.
To be involved.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, good.
Yeah.
Good to know. So your fourth question, what areas would you recommend North Idaho to invest in to mitigate the impact of growth?
Yeah. So that question is kind of thrown a little bit of a curveball to me, only because of the use of the word invest. So I'm a little curious of what you mean by that when you say invest.
Well, obviously it's not your pocket, your
Right.
purse. But what can the county invest in
Okay.
to make your job, the assessor's job, better?
Okay.
So for instance, you already implemented better computer programs, right?
And yeah.
What else?
Okay. Well, let me step back a
But
little.
then keep in mind the growth.
Yes. Yes. Yes, and it has grown, hasn't it? And it continues to grow. So let me step back a little bit. I want to give you, before I answer that question, I want to give my perspective and my philosophy a little bit. Because I don't necessarily think that everything, this is an understatement, and I'm trying to be very diplomatic in how I say this. I don't believe that everything that government touches, that government necessarily makes it all better. In fact, I think government can do a much better job of making things better. I tend to think that government intervention only generates more government intervention. And that increases taxes, that increases control. I would rather see things more locally controlled by our local people and our local government than I would have somebody in Boise controlling our area and the way we do things.
Agreed.
And so that's a very important issue. So let's recognize in this question that what this question is asking about is what can be done to mitigate the impact. That question necessarily means more government. And so the question is, do we want that? Do we want more government? And you know, we have a deliberative, participatory government process. It's of the people, by the people, and for the people. And so I believe that people should be involved. It's a difficult thing because most of us want to work and we want to punch the clock and go home. We want to go to our grandchildren's baseball games. We want to have our barbecues. We want to do some little R&R, rest and relaxation. We don't want to live to work. We want to have some fun time and play, right? So, but we have to be involved in government, because if we don't get involved in government, it finds a way to creep into our lives and control us. So this question is about government intervention. So let's recognize that. And the other thing is, whenever we have government intervention, we raise costs. So let's take a look at this in terms of what that means in terms of an impact on my operations, right? It's going to impact costs. I mean, you're talking about impact fees. Now, I am not saying that I necessarily think that there's a reason alone for there to be no impact fee, if you're talking impact fees, right? I think that if a developer or a builder, or let's say a large manufacturing plant, if they come in and they build their operations, is that going to impact traffic? Is that going to impact noise? Is it going to impact water? Is it going to impact sewer? Yeah, it's going to impact that. Why should the local property owners who already live there have to pay for that? Right? So personally, I don't want to pay for that, and I think if somebody wants to bring in and profit and benefit by some form of development, I think that probably should be on the developer, right? Yeah. So there's this give and take between not wanting government intervention and not wanting government to control us, but also wanting government to protect us so that we don't have to pay for somebody else's entrepreneurial endeavor. And so that necessarily involves a participatory process. It involves a comprehensive plan. It involves developing impact fees, and that's where it can become very contentious, because you know, there's the necessarily involved in that is the discussion of private property rights, right? And so you start talking about implementing impact fees. You're telling somebody what they can and can't do with their private property, and then all those other arguments enter into it. I don't have the answers to that, you know, and I guess what I mean by that is one of the things I think is very important is for our elected officials to stay in their lane, right? Because if it is of the people, by the people, and for the people, then we work for the people.
Right.
And my power comes from where? As an elected official, where do I get my authority from? The people. And it's given to me in the form of the laws. So I have to have my nose in the book, reading the law book, knowing what my boundaries are, and I can't tread over the lines of the boundary. I have to work within that framework. And I know from the laws that I've read that it's not the purview of the assessor to weigh in on impact fees or on impact or growth. Do I care about growth? Do I care about how it affects my family and our community? Absolutely I do. Do I have the authority to step in and direct it and change it? No, I don't. That's more of the role of the county commissioner. And I know they're talking about it, I know they're looking at it. I think the assessor's office can play a big role in some ways, because what did I say at the beginning of our segment? Data, right? So we deal with data, right? There's probably no one single operation in county government, really, or in many of it, maybe except for the Bureau of Labor Statistics, that deals with more data than an assessor office.
Yeah.
We deal with data. Now, is it within the boundaries of the state, of the laws, of the statute that says that the assessor office has to be involved in economic development? Right now, it doesn't say that, but when developers or the community leaders want to start looking at those kinds of things, invariably they come to the assessor's office and they ask for data. I mean, I have one of the most interesting public records requests I got was I got from an entity out of LA that was doing a study for air traffic.
From LA?
Well, I would suspect that they were, I mean, one of the things we can't do is we can't ask, who are you and why do you want the data? We can't do that. I mean, it's transparency, and so it's a public records request, and so we have to respond to the public records request. But they wanted to know about growth patterns around the airport, and I'm guessing that what they were looking at is possibly ways to increase air traffic to our airport.
Oh,
So,
okay.
so invariably, people look to the assessor's office because we deal with and we work with a lot of data. If that truly is a benefit and a value to our community, then we need good systems. We need good computer systems to be able to gather, collect, harness that data. We got to think about, is that role, is that mission of doing that, is that in alignment with the statutory definition of what I should be focused on? Because everything I do, my staff does, everything we do is based on resources. The minute we start working on something, we're spending your money, we're spending tax dollars.
Yeah.
That's a resource. So we got to be cognizant of that. And so if we as a community want the assessor to be involved in economic development or areas of impact or things like that, then that's just a need that needs to be recognized by the community. It needs to be modified by state legislature, by the law changes, and then it needs to be resourced so that we have the proper tools and the resources to do that. So I hope that answers your question.
It does, because it gives us a good insight into how you prioritize your job.
Right now,
And I appreciate that you
Yeah.
recognize there's limitations to what you can and cannot be involved in.
there absolutely are. When I held my hand up and I swore an oath that said I would uphold the laws of the state of Idaho and the state constitution and the U.S. Constitution, I took it very seriously. And that's why I had my nose in the book of law and reading the law. I learned a very important lesson early on in my career at Spokane County. A very good attorney that I worked with said to me, Bela, I don't care how many times you've read the law. If you're facing a new issue, read it again. And because it's amazing, it does a number of things. When you read it again, you pick up things that maybe you didn't notice before.
Because the challenge is different.
And you're reading the law in the context of it, but you're also committing it to memory as you're reading it, right? Don't rely on that memory. Always read it again, because the memory can fail you. But it's always good to do that. And so I've practiced that, and that's why I think some of the law is just embedded in my brain. But I have to walk the straight and narrow. I respect the authority that was given to me by the people, and those are the limits of my authority.
Well, I think the people would appreciate that.
Yeah.
So your last question, expand on your experience. You already covered a little bit about that, but anything else that you didn't cover and what you have to offer for this position?
Yeah. Well, let me talk a little bit about myself. The commitment I have to doing things right, to fighting for freedoms and safeguarding and protecting our rights, it's very important to me for two reasons. The first reason, I think a lot, I actually have a picture of my grandfather on my desk. I've never met him, didn't have a chance to. He was taken away by Russian soldiers during World War II. My father grew up in an area that is now considered to be part of the Ukraine. At that time, just before or during World War II, it was Hungary. So there was a short time frame after the breakout of the war where my father and my grandfather decided they'd wake up, they wanted to go to church. And that's one thing that you don't do in a communist country because religion is forbidden. As Karl Marx said, it's the opiate of the nation. And so, but that didn't stop my grandfather and my dad. My dad was about 10 years old at the time, and there was about 3 foot of snow on the ground, and they decided to go to church. And they woke up, it was a Sunday morning, they went to church, just those two. My grandmother didn't want to risk it. And as they were leaving the church, they were spotted by 2 Russian soldiers, and they were stopped at gunpoint. And about a week or two before that, I get the words wrong, the commandant or the commissariat demanded that all the men in the territory register because they were going to be shuttled off to war. They needed people. And my grandfather he was a tailor. He just made clothes, and he didn't register. And so they took him away. There's mixed stories in terms of whether or not he made it to the front line or he was shot with a mass number of men. They lost a lot of men. And so for me, it's personal because he lost a lot of freedoms at a very young age, at age 33. And so I keep that picture on my desk, and I look at it often, and I see I know what he's gone through, what my dad went through. My grandmother pretty much lost her faith at that time because she couldn't comprehend how God would allow
when they
something
went
like
to
that.
church.
Yeah. And so she did not want to celebrate. That was at the end of November that happened. I later researched it and found out that day in the year 1944 was the 26th of November, which is my birthday.
Oh, wow.
And that's every year they celebrate that by ringing the church bell. So that's kind of drove it home personal to me, that if there's anything I can do, just a personal commitment to try to make a difference in the world, that's what I'm going to do. The second part is in 2022. It was a very challenging campaign year. When I ran for re-election, I was appointed in 2020 unanimously. And in 2022 I ran, and I'm not going to go into the turmoil, but I think all those of us who were here know and remember. But I ended up having to take an emergency trip during the last week of the campaign. In fact, what's today? Today's the 8th?
Yes.
So I was dreading this day today and yesterday because it was the 7th of May of 2022 that I got a phone call from my sister, and she said, "Bela, Mom's not going to make it. She had cancer. She had terminal cancer, and Mom wanted to be here when the election took place, but you need to come." The next day, on the 8th of May, I was on the airplane, and I went to go visit my parents for initially 7 days, but then I extended it, and I'm glad I did because the election took place on May 17th. My mother passed on May 16th. And I brought my county laptop with me, and the property rolls had to be certified at that time frame. Now's the time to do it. I literally sat next to my mother at her deathbed as she was dying, and it's the worst thing to working, certifying the property rolls. And it's the worst feeling that you can have when you see a loved one in front of you drowning, literally drowning. I don't know if you know about this, but there's fluid that builds up in your body from cancer, and she literally drowned from the fluid while that was going on. But I certified the rolls, and what really hurts is later on that year, I was accused of being late on the property rolls. I wasn't. I was 6 weeks early. The property rolls were late that year, but not. If you look at the law says that after the 28th of June, after the 4th Monday of June, all ownership of the property rolls shifts over to the Board of County Commissioners. Okay. Since I had already delivered the property rolls before the Board of Equalization, the job of the assessor is done. It's done. Statutorily, the burden shifts over to the commissioners. And so, and that year, there was a lot of appeals, right? 791 appeals.
I remember.
And there was only 3 commissioners, and I was in the meeting, when Commissioner Chris Filio said, gosh, we have 791, he had the calculator up, he ran the numbers on the calculator, and he says, if we estimate 20 minutes per appeal, he did the math, extending it out, he goes, that's 6 weeks. We can't do this in 6 weeks, we have to extend. So he waited until because it's 2 weeks, it ends on the second Monday of July. That was the 11th of July. The second, so the day after that was the 12th. He sent a letter to the tax commission asking to reopen it. They did, they opened it for 1 more week to the 19th of July. And so it closed again, and then a week after that, they discovered 10 properties that were appealed that were missed.
Oh.
And so they had to reopen it again a second time.
Oh, okay.
And so it's the combination of those delays that caused the property rolls to be late. And of course, you have these complex computer problems that
But that's not what we heard publicly.
That's not what you heard, right? And let's compare this to Ada County. In Ada County, they had about 1,700 appeals. They also have 3 commissioners. They got through it in 2 weeks. They did not have to extend. They didn't have the same computer system problems we had. And so and I was still pretty new, right? I had been on the job for about, well, it was close to 2 years, right? The first year I was not involved in the property rolls, as I said before. The second year, well, for the first year and a half, I was involved in the DMV. There were lots of problems. I had to work on fixing the DMV. So the first 2 years, essentially, I was not really involved in the property rolls, right? The first property roll I was involved in was 2022. But they were late. I didn't fully understand or know all the laws. I was still getting my nose in the books and reading them, and at the time I didn't realize that, oh no, clearly it's all the commissioners after the 4th Monday of June. And so they called me to a meeting, they accused me of being late on the rolls. I was dumbfounded. I was told I was facing 6 months in jail and a $5,000 fine, and they wanted me out. And when I researched it, I thought, I've discovered, this is not on me. And so I stuck to my guns. I decided to stick to my guns. There's a lot more that can be said about that, so we don't want to go into that necessarily right now. I think the message I want to close with is things look very promising in the assessor's office. We've got new people, new team players. We've got people that are open to change. They're receptive to innovation. There are still a few people that don't like change. I mean, most people don't like change. It's not part of human nature. Change is difficult, especially when you've worked there a lifetime. And there are a lot of people that have been there a lot, it's their only job that they've had. Yeah. And so they've got their eyes on the retirement that they deserve. They want to retire. Who doesn't, right? And so the last thing they want to see is that a change in the way they do their jobs and the business. And changes in computer systems can be very frustrating. Yeah. So we have a little bit of a polarization, but we've got a great team. We're doing good things. There's lots of innovation. There's lots of processes improvements. I didn't really have a chance to get into that. Maybe we could do another segment sometime after the election, hopefully. Yeah. And where I can come back and talk to you about all the accomplishments, the innovations, and the improvements that have been made.
Yeah, that would be fun, especially because it'll be a learning experience for all of us, all the voters. Yeah. Anything else in your closing statement? Anything else that you want to cover?
No, I think we covered it. I want to finish on the positive and focus on what we can do. I just my slogan, as it were, is respect for the past, realism for the future, for the present, and optimism for the future. And I think we can do some great things.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Yeah. We appreciate it. We learned a lot. I learned a lot.
Thank you.
So, thank you. There you have it, Kootenai County. This is your current county assessor, and he's running for re-election.
I hope to have you earned your vote on May 19th. Thank you very much.